Hi there. Welcome to another episode of the Semi-Related Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Eischen, and today with me I have Amanda Pearson. Amanda, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing good. We were just talking before the show about the little bit of difference in weather. I'm here in Dallas and you're up in Maine, so
Yeah.
sound
We're hitting below zero tonight, so we're bundled up.
well. I'm glad we're out of that portion. We're back up to the 70s here in Dallas and looking forward to it. So
Yeah. Lucky ducks.
Well, awesome. I'd love to just kind of get into what we're here to talk about today. So, Amanda, you are the profitability program facilitator for the TCA. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. We have a
That is
benchmarking program.
one of the longer titles there. Is that a mouthful? Do you get that
It
mixed
is.
up quite a bit?
Yeah, I facilitate best practice group meetings, really. That's what it comes down to.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about the program and how it got started.
Sure. So our program is a little over 20 years old now. Jack Porter, those in the industry will recognize that name. He started this program with some trucking companies that wanted to benchmark against one another. So he worked with them for startup, and TCA became the home of that program. And really, the collective idea behind this is building groups that have a very transparent approach to sharing best ideas, best practices. And we've developed a really great composite that allows carriers to benchmark KPIs evenly and effectively. So we've spent, like I said, over 20 years. We have well over 100 carriers active in the program now. And we are growing. We are adding new groups and building new programs. And there's been a real thirst for the type of data and expertise and experience that we're discussing.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about the groups. Kind of what is the makeup and the mix of carriers who are involved with this, and then what is a typical meeting like?
Sure. So our groups are all designed by mode. So we have flatbed, van, reefer, bulk, and brokerage. And each group, we probably have anywhere between 7 to 15 carriers, depending on which group they're in. They meet 2 to 3 times a year in person. Each meeting's about a day and a half long. The meetings are topic specific. So the group, everything is member driven. So the group will decide if they want it to be an operations, safety, maintenance, recruiting, financial health, succession planning. We will come up with a topic. We create that agenda. We obviously spend time digging into the composite and sharing our KPIs around the subject matter. We oftentimes invite a vendor to do a vendor presentation that more often than not is specific to the topic type that we're discussing. But really, the gist of it is that best idea sharing. We look at the folks in our group who are doing a phenomenal job and really have mastered certain aspects of their business. And we share, how did they get there? What were their failures? What were their successes? The groups are comprised of carriers who believe the worst thing for our business is a bad competitor. It's really important that people understand business. They understand their costs and they understand growth and have a desire to want to be better. So these groups give us a chance to dig deep into very specific subject matters and share those best ideas. The
And
composite is something that comes out every month. So every month you'll receive a composite that is 90 days in the rears. And you can, obviously sure that there is some fun to that. You want to make sure you're on the left side of the page, and there is some competition within your group to see who's doing well and what happened and who has a surprise. So I think there's a lot of conversation that takes place outside of the meetings too around those numbers.
and what is it that enables these competitors to be so friendly and come together and share this information and be so open with each other, not just, in these meetings, but to share these numbers and just to have this community that kind of forms around this group?
Yeah. So first of all, we make sure there's no direct competitors in the group. So when we are putting the groups together, there is a process that goes through legal to assure that we don't have any direct competitors. But secondly, is that desire for transparency. So if you're going to come to the table and share your KPIs with the group, you expect that in return, for one. And then for two, if you're going to start sharing your best ideas or the things you've learned from your failures, you also expect that from the people within your group. And over time, you really do start to build that trust with the folks that are in your group. I mean, one of these groups have been together for 20 years. It really does take probably a couple meetings to get to know people and to build that level of trust and transparency. But when you're in the meeting, you realize how everybody is there for the same reason, and you are going to receive what you put out there. So when you open yourself up and share your experiences, it's remarkable what you get in return. And I think that that's the process that has proven to be successful, is everybody's there for the same reason.
And yeah, let's take a minute to talk about you. I know this is always the fun part. Guests love this part, right? To talk
Yeah,
about
that's right.
themselves. But what kind of brought you to be one of these facilitators, and how do you relate so well with this group and enjoy this work so much?
So I found myself in, I believe, what is now coined supply chain management. I didn't know it was a thing 20 years ago. But I started in a warehouse that was owned by a railroad. And then I went into railroad sales, and I spent some time in a manufacturing facility, and then joined a trucking company. And I worked for Pottles Transportation. We were based in Maine, but we had terminals in Pennsylvania and Missouri. And Barry is a big advocate of this type of community. He's a big advocate in sharing and learning and growing together. And he brought Jack Porter and benchmarking to Pottles, and I spent about 8 years working directly with Jack, and enjoying the benefits of these meetings. And I'll tell you, the first one I attended, I thought, I don't think I'm supposed to be talking about this. Like, these are like, this is who we are. We keep all of this stuff a secret. But when you realize that, in Maine, especially, you can kind of feel like you're at the end of the trucking world. So it was so nice to be able to hear other trucking companies experiencing the same things we are, or trying new things that we've thought about but didn't know if we could. And when you see other companies doing it, you can do it. And it really gave you the courage as a manager to say, if they can do it, then we can do it. And when you put it into the data, I mean, I'm a huge advocate of data. I believe, numbers remove the emotion, and I believe wholeheartedly in running your business by the numbers. So when you can now take that composite and say, how are you 2 cents lower per mile on tires than me? What are you doing so different that's saving you 2 cents a mile? And then you start to learn from other people. And I just had never been in a industrial setting that allowed that type of conversation to take place, and to be able to share like that, and realize that the trucking community really does want other trucking companies to be successful. I mean, we may be competitors, but it is important that we're all successful here. And I was super impressed with that. And the opportunity came. TCA was looking to add a facilitator and grow some groups. And I obviously love this program very much, and was a big fan of it. So it was an easy transition for me, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I reached out to you because I'd spoken to one of your members who just had nothing but glowing reviews to say about the program and was so in love with it. And then I've also talked to a couple members who aren't involved with the group but had similar experiences just with people they knew on maybe a smaller scale than what you're doing through this program. And what do you think it is about trucking that enables everyone to be so friendly? I mean, similar to your story, I feel like a lot of people have kind of found themselves here in transportation, but once they get here, they love it, and this community has formed. So, what do you think it is that makes these people just so happy to help?
Yeah, no, there's a secret sauce to trucking that is hard to explain, that's for sure. It's no joke. Once you get in, you don't get out. You may shift your focus, or you may find yourself in some other place, but once it's in you, man, it's hard to step aside from it. But for me, it's the authenticity of the people that I work with. When
Mm-hmm.
I meet owners or I meet leaders, I meet fleet managers, I meet drivers, they're a very authentic group of people. And the ability for them to shoot you straight at all times. I mean, you're going to hear exactly what they're thinking, regardless of where they are in the company or where they are in the industry. That's super refreshing. You don't get that in other industries. Um, and we all have an immense amount of respect for one another. Regardless of what company you work for, if you meet a driver for another company, you have tremendous respect for them because you wholeheartedly understand what they're going through and they're dealing with. And if you meet somebody who's in transportation leadership, you know what they're dealing, you understand it. So I think the respect that we share with one another and the appreciation for the work that we do goes a long ways.
Yeah. So tell me what a typical meeting is like, kind of whenever you're running through these numbers. How do the conversations go? And um, yeah, just
Yeah.
what is it kind of from the facilitator standpoint?
Sure. So we kick these meetings off with a hot topic roundtable discussion. So we go around the room and everybody gets to talk about what's on fire for you. What is the hot topic? What are you spending your time focused on? What problems are you trying to solve? And that is always super interesting because regardless of where they are in the country or regardless of what type of freight they're dealing with, our hot topic lists are usually pretty consistent. We're dealing with truck parking, hiring the right people, just the market. The market is a challenge for everybody, right? And everybody's trying to figure out how to handle that. So we do a roundtable discussion. We then spend a couple hours doing a deep dive into the composite. So we will pull up the KPIs and take a look at where this group is ranked compared to the other groups, who's excelling in this group, who's falling off, and just ask why. It's amazing when you put a KPI up, which could be revenue per truck, and you trend that. And then we stack it up against the other groups and then start having conversations about who's rising, who's falling, what's leading to that, what's in the dialogue that comes out of that is really impressive. And we'll spend probably 2 hours going through just that piece of it. We then, depending on what the agenda is, we have an agenda committee. So we'll pick topics and we'll dig into it. We may say, here, let's talk about how your customer service team is structured. What's working, what isn't. There's usually a supplemental survey we send out just so we can dig a little deeper. May have 20 extra questions on it. So we'll review the results of that supplemental survey. We do a best idea session. Every carrier needs to come to the meeting with a best idea. They put some money on the table and they vote first and second place. So there's always a win out of that. But we have learned some really, really great ideas from that best idea sharing practice. A vendor presentation, and usually the vendor is recommended by a carrier. So the vendor will come to the group and say, hey, I'm working with this new solar panel guy, and it's given us phenomenal results. I really think you should listen to them. So we'll bring the vendor in, and the carrier who recommended them can share their experience with them. And then once a year, we also do a site visit. So we pick a carrier in the group, and one of the meetings every year is at someone's terminal. And those are great visits too, because it allows us we're invited into the terminal, we're invited to walk through, meet their team members, look at how, their shop is set up or how operations is set up, what their driver, training process looks like. But we get to do a deep dive specifically with that carrier. And that carrier may ask for feedback. They may say, hey, listen, we're having problems here. I'm a little bit stumped of what to do here. Tell me what you see. So really, they get an advisory council of successful trucking company executives walking through and saying, I liked that. Geez, I'd try this here. And it's just a great way for them to get some insight into what their program is. So site visits are really important to us every year as well.
So, could you give some examples or maybe a success story of someone who's been in this program and found they were maybe not living up to the benchmarks of other group members and how they kind of came around and helped them work through that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. We have one member, he's in a reefer group, and he shares this regularly. He's a very proud advocate of this. But he was really struggling with whether owner operators were successful. Like he just couldn't quite figure out within his company if owner operators were a good fit. So when he joined the benchmarking group, we break out company fleet, owner operator, and then total. So you can really take a deep dive into what your company fleet's doing, what your owner operators are doing, and then see the impact that either one of them have on your total. And through our KPIs, he was able to identify the owner operator KPIs that were indicative that their program was not set up correctly, that was actually detrimental to what they were trying to accomplish. And for him, he could take that, especially compared to the other people in his group, and say, see, we have so much more room to get better here. And it was a complete game changer. He said that it changed his entire profit for his organization once they were able to identify, track, and change those owner operator KPIs. And he said without TPP, he wouldn't have been able to recognize that, because so often you don't know if you're in line. You don't know where you are compared to other people. So for him to be able to look at that and say, our owner operator program is way off. This is not how we want to be doing business. We had another carrier, actually had a great conversation with him. They're an Ohio-based carrier, and they really were looking to grow. But just how do you grow? Like, what do you do? So in their meetings, they really got to dig into, at the time, where growth was coming from. And it was at the time when the driver shortage was what everybody was talking about. And they really realized that the people who were growing had driver finishing programs, had driver schools, had a way to attract the untrained and then train them into their system. And they took the advice. They were able to meet with a few other members that had driver finishing programs and driver schools. They developed a finishing program, then they developed a school. And he shares the stats with us regularly that, they've doubled the size of their company, and 70% of those drivers came from the finishing or the school,
Wow.
which he never would have done if he didn't have the ability to network with other people in the group and really understand how that works and get it off the ground. And those are the stories we hear. Like, you don't know what is possible until you see someone else doing it. And then you're like, well, if they can do it, why can't we? And you're in a situation where they're willing to share. They're willing to share their shortcomings as well as what works. One of the
Well, I
one
was
of
just
the
gonna
best
say,
meetings we ever had, we, instead of a best idea, we did a worst idea. And everybody came to the table with what their biggest failure was. And interestingly enough, there were 13 carriers in that meeting, and every single idea revolved around a personnel decision, whether it was incentivizing incorrectly, hiring incorrectly, something like that. So we spent hours talking about the importance of people management. And I don't think you necessarily always dig into that when you're in a business environment, how important people management is. But we had a phenomenal meeting just around what to do well and what not to do when it comes to people.
yeah, and it's always going to be one of those largest cost centers for the carrier, right? So getting the most productivity out of that includes, like you said, that people management side. But as you dig into these KPIs and a carrier finds, hey, I'm not performing with my owner operator program, for example, how do they take next steps? How do they remedy the situation? I mean, it's one thing to identify the problem, but then how do they work with the group or internally to find a solution to it?
Yeah, no, this is fascinating too. So, our facilitators can work one on one with carriers. If you wish to take that next step, you can contract with the facilitators to do some one on one work. But really, the key comes down to, what their goal is and the culture within their company. So we advocate, I think those EOS systems, any type of traction that you can use, any of those programs that help you set your goal and then manage the steps to achieving your goal become really important. And we do talk about that a lot, and we share what companies use to be successful with change. So really, once a carrier identifies something that they want to get better at, the company has to decide how they want to manage change. Do they want to bring in a change advocate who is going to push and propel and stir them? Or do they already have a system in place for that? And that varies. That absolutely varies. But you're absolutely right. Just because they identify something that could be better doesn't mean um, it's going to instantly get better. It takes a lot of work to move those dials.
And then you've seen a lot of companies come through this program and be a part of it and been a part of one yourself. What do you think it is that kind of sets carriers apart? Maybe there's something for the high performers that you've kind of noticed as a trend.
You know, the really, really good carriers are the carriers who understand what their values are. They understand their culture. They've developed a group where every single department knows their piece, and every single department's goals and KPIs all feed up to the ultimate goal within the company. And I think the uber successful trucking companies really have mastered how to break that all down. And when you see it, the light bulb just goes off. Um, Trucking, I think companies can be very siloed. Operations can work very separate from maintenance, very separate from safety, very separate from recruiting. They can all feel like they know their mission, but their missions can really have them rowing in different directions. And when companies work from a place of very good company values, of a solid culture with goals that all connect, and that all push up to the higher ultimate goal, that's where you see the magic happen. That's where you see the magic happen.
And then you gave an example earlier too of a company that wanted to grow quickly, and that's something you often hear. You know, these companies are ready to grow, but making that happen is very difficult. So, what were some of the learnings from that session and maybe that case study that kind of you'd like to share with other carriers looking to grow as well?
Yeah, growth is what we're all talking about, right? Especially coming out of COVID. Like that, what we experienced for those 24 months during COVID and during the pandemic, and then the downturn, has people off balance, trying to understand what's next and how to move forward. And I mean, people always say if you're not growing, you're dying. So we need to keep growing. We need to keep growing. It is critical that you understand your strengths and your weaknesses when it comes to growth. Some of the biggest mistakes we see are people growing in areas that they don't have expertise in. Just because a customer calls you up and wants you to all of a sudden take this new product in a new lane doesn't mean you should. You have to really evaluate if that's your strength, if that's your sweet spot, and how you're going to be successful in that. Not all business is the right business for you. And that's super hard, especially in this market. We want to have catcher's mitts on both hands and take everything that we can get. But that doesn't mean it's the right freight for us. It doesn't mean it's the right load for us. And it doesn't mean it's profitable for us. So really understanding all of your costs, having you have to understand what your cost per mile is. Any trucking company that is functioning right now that doesn't have a solid understanding of their costs, they're winging it, and you can't get far with that type of mentality. So I think it is really important to know your strengths, know your costs, know what your lanes are, and also trust yourself. You've made it this far by trusting yourself. And I think that this market is lending itself to people to start to question, like, I don't know, like, I'm not sure, but trust your gut. So many of these trucking companies were built on the backs of families. One or two people started out with 4 trucks and now they're up to 75 trucks. You got there because you know what you're doing. Continue to trust yourself, but let's give you the data so that you can support what you're finding. And growth will happen. It will happen if you stay focused on it.
And then how do carriers balance kind of their own unique niche portion of the market as well as taking these learnings from other carriers? Like you're kind of talking about here with trusting your gut, but also let's come into this group and see what else is happening. What
Mhm.
are some tips to maybe finding that balance between your own secret sauce and best practices?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's the fun part of it, right? Because you see so many other people doing things. Like I remember when I went to these meetings and learned about the other types of just what you said, niche markets, like things that we were a van carrier and I started learning about, pharmaceutical halls and um performance, understanding that there are entire contracts put out there to just move shows across the US and just all these different things that you're just not exposed to. It just takes time to hear and learn and see them all. Um, and the key is they're all exciting. You want to get involved in all of them because you think this is such a great idea. But again, what am I really good at? What does my company do really well? And then how does that fit in with what this customer is looking for? And when you know exactly what you're good at and you can align that with what your customer value, the customer values has set forth for you, that's where the win is. But, if you're not good at, weekend, nighttime deliveries, we should avoid, certain freight. And the growth doesn't matter. We're not going to be good at it. And you've got to be honest with yourself about that. But it is also don't be afraid of it. Um, Ask the questions, learn as much as you can about it. And the key, I think, is to know what's important to your customer. So when you're stepping into a new niche and you're trying to understand a new market, you have to understand what is unique and what the customer values, and then how can you match that?
And then where do you think innovation fits in here too? Because we talk a lot about learning from each other. You talk about this opportunity to bring in these best ideas and even maybe sometimes a worst idea. Tell me where some examples or what you've seen on innovation in these groups.
It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. So we have some carriers who are in the cutting edge of everything technology. And we really lean on them. We lean, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What is happening with this? But they bring some of the most interesting things to us. We've had vendor presentation on this really cool solar panel. It is remarkable what technology has done for solar and the impact that it's had on trucks. And this particular solar panel is just cutting edge. It's nothing I'd ever seen before in anything. And he is really, it's a everybody said it's military grade. Everybody loves to advertise that. But he legitimately designed this for the military and then discovered, hey, it works great on tractor trailers. So maybe we could line it up here. And we have carriers who are using this technology and they brought it and really had the ROIs to discuss how it was saving on APU and it was saving, the driver satisfaction component of it, what it was doing for their fuel costs. They had done the work on that. Batteries, lithium deep cycle batteries, just that's cutting edge technology that trucking companies are trying to put into their trucks. It used to be, how do we track a truck? How do we track a trailer? All things those are important. Don't get me wrong, those are important. But we're really now looking at a lot of that green energy, what works, what doesn't, and where does it work? So just because it works in Arizona doesn't mean it's going to work up in Montreal. And we get to have those conversations with our carriers. They talk about that. We put these systems in, we got no return if the temperature was above this on average for however many calendar days, or they really dig into that. So technology and sharing new ideas, it's fascinating what they bring to us.
And then, too, I want to kind of touch on what you've seen in this group through different market cycles. I know you've been a part of this for a little while, and even recently, we've seen some large, up and down in the market. So, tell me a little bit about how the group has responded to that and come together, and what lessons and learnings have come from that as well.
It is so when you're in the middle of a downturn, right? It's very panicky. Here, it's very uncomfortable. But you go to these meetings and you're surrounded by executives who have decades of experience, and they sit there so calmly and they say, that's right. It's a cycle. Our cycle is going to come out of it. So what did we learn last cycle? It is being in a room of so much wisdom instead of that panicky feeling that you can sometimes get when you're in the day to day. Like, this has to stop. When is it going to end type thing? But to have the counsel of decades of experience is very, very interesting to watch. They are a lot more calm about it than you might think they would be. They understand the detriment, they understand the pain, but they also understand it doesn't last forever. And they will remind one another of the lessons. When we went through this before, remember we did X, Y, and Z. Can we still do that now? Does that still apply? And I think that the group really looks forward to that. I had one carrier that I spoke to a few months ago, and he's a smaller carrier. He's around 90 trucks. And he said, I don't have a board of directors. It's just me. But I really look to my best practice group to be my advisory council. And when I need advice and I need help getting through a problem, I turn to my advisory council. And on this council are trucking executives with dozens and dozens and dozens of years of experience at being successful. These are successful trucking executives, not ones who have failed. So he really counts on that to advise him through some of those harder moments that he has had to face.
And then talk a little bit too about how you're seeing carriers come into this group. What drives them to want to be a part of this, and
Mhm.
how do they find out about TCA and this profitability program group as well?
Yeah, it's super interesting how they find out. So it is kind of what I think is trucking's best kept secret. I don't think that it is out there for the masses to consume by any means. So it is kind of a if a trucking company knows of another really solid trucking company, they'll have a conversation with them and say, "Hey, listen, we do this benchmarking and this best practice group. I really think you would benefit from it. Would you consider benchmarking with us?" And it becomes kind of that ebb and flow within the group. We definitely get people who join TCA, hear about it, and are interested. A lot of our groups have been together for a long time, so they're very selective about who joins their group. There is a vetting process. You do have to get voted in. There is a carrier review, again, like I mentioned, to make sure we have no direct competitors within the group. But we have to make sure we're all of this sort of the same mindset, that you're looking to accomplish the same things. And we have some groups who are super focused on innovation, so they're always looking for that carrier who is on the cutting edge of things that are new. And then we have another group who is really old school trucking, and the owners are that old school trucking thought process, and they're very selective because they want someone who is that salt of the earth to join and have that same approach to what they're doing. So there's a home for everybody, really. And we do have a small carrier group. We do a small carrier program. If you have less than 100 trucks, we have a 1-year program that we can put you through that kind of gets you up and going, because it is a lot to start the benchmarking process, like the input sheet and getting your numbers in line and that sort of thing. So we do kind of have a ramp up program to help you get there for that. But we have carriers in our groups that range from 50 trucks to 9,000. We cover it all. And it is interesting who comes, who stays, and then who grows with us. We have a great group.
How do you nurture this diversity too? I know you mentioned there's so many different types of groups. How does TCA and you as a facilitator support them in all of these different matters too?
Yeah. Sometimes the larger carriers, the carriers who are maybe that 3, 4, 500 trucks, they may be a little bit hesitant to benchmark against someone with 50. because they're thinking, what could I learn, or what is here? But we all started there. We all started at some point at that size. And every carrier is dealing with the same thing. It's just an economies of scale. So we're all dealing with how to recruit drivers, how to retain drivers, how to find operations staff. What are we doing with technicians? And just because you have 50 trucks versus 500 doesn't mean that your ideas are less impactful. And it doesn't mean that your ideas are, they can be scaled. And if you have 500 trucks and you have a great recruiting idea, we can scale that down to a 50 truck company. So one of my roles as a facilitator is to help line that up for folks, is to keep that conversation going so that the smaller carriers don't feel overshadowed and the larger carriers remember that there are still good ideas in what's happening at a smaller carrier.
And then how has your experience as working at a trucking company before this, being a part of the group, and now being a facilitator, how has that previous experience played into the day-to-day, and how helpful is that whenever you're working with these companies?
I mean, I would like to think it's super helpful. I feel what they're doing. I like when they are discussing the pain of an OS&D or the pain of the bid cycle. I completely understand that. I think that the experience that I have and that I bring to the table allows me to ask the extra questions that help us uncover a deeper answer. If you're not exposed to what an RFP process looks like and you're just listening to people discuss it, you can't peel the layers of the onion back when it comes to that process. And I think that my experience allows for that. We worked with great facilitators. We're very lucky. Jack Porter, Shepherd Dunn, the experience that they have in the business and that they have in the trucking industry is absolutely wonderful. And there is something very different about trucking. And just because you are a business management degree or just because you've run a company, there is something very unique about running a trucking company. And I think that comes through in my facilitation and Jack's facilitation and Chef's facilitation, because we've been in the trenches and can ask those questions that get people to think one or two steps further than what someone would who hasn't been there.
And then what are some of the hot button issues that come up? I know you said you kind of open up these meetings with this. Is this something that changes pretty regularly, or is this something that they're consistently fighting over and over? Kind of what have you noticed with that group of questions too?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that there are definitely things we have not solved in trucking, right? We have not solved truck parking. Truck parking is a huge issue for our industry. It is a safety concern. It is an hours of service concern. We are fighting this at local, state, federal levels. But truck parking is something we discuss every meeting. We discuss at every convention. We don't have a solution yet. TCA and ATA, we're advocating for those solutions and we're helping our members advocate at a state level for those. But we've got to do better for that. I think that the 26, 27 engine, for technology, when we're talking about regulations, that's huge. What's our buy cycle going to be for equipment? What are we going to do to solve the admission standards that are being put out in front of us? What is that going to add to cost for us? We talk about that every meeting. That is something that comes up every meeting. There's always stuff being thrown at trucking for regulation, right? Every administration, every year, there are always things that we're trying to tackle, whether it is drug and alcohol, compliance, whether it's your hours of service, what are owner operators, what are the laws that are being developed to inhibit owner operator success? We're discussing those constantly. The things that pop up that are market driven might be just the downturn or an upturn, or it could be what are you seeing here or there. It can also be like a new push. I think that technology comes out a lot that customers embrace. And we sometimes come to these meetings and say, what is up with every customer wanting us to do this now? Like, why is this happening? And how are we managing this? Is it a fad? Is it going to go away? Do I have to rebuild my systems to include this now? What do we think? So we share those as well. But it is interesting. I think that even though every trucking company is different, we are all dealing with the same exact problems. We're just dealing with it in different parts of the country.
And then to tie into that too, you mentioned that they're all different, but we can look at similar things. What are some of the main KPIs that you all like to look at as a group and a starting point whenever bringing in a new carrier, for example, to this group?
Yeah. So we have over 300 KPIs. So that composite opens up and it can be real daunting. It can feel very overwhelming for people, for sure. But we have your OR. So what's your operating ratio? And that is a big one. Everybody, that's page one. People go to that. Where am I ranked and how am I compared to my group? And what are the averages of the other group? And that trend tells us a lot. But really, what we've done is we've developed KPIs that allow us to take all of these trucking companies and get an apple to apple comparison. So we do a lot of percent of revenue or per mile. We like to look at, one of the big ones we discuss a lot is revenue per truck. We talk about the one that I think has been key for the last probably 3 years to look at is driver pay percent of revenue. So we can go back 5 years and look at driver pay percent of revenue, and that was probably 28%, 26, maybe 30. And then COVID hit and we watched driver pay skyrocket. We did watch revenue skyrocket, but now we're finding driver pay percent of revenue to be 38 to 44%. It's never been that high. So what we're able to do is have conversations around the fact that driver pay outpaced revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And what did we learn from that? Are we ever going to get that back in alignment? And then there are some companies who did a really good job with that. So let's talk to them. How did you keep that in line? And what does that look like? So it does depend on the market as to what KPI we're looking at. But, when we do a maintenance meeting, digging into all of those maintenance KPIs, what is your cost of tires, your APU, your on road, what do you have for in-house? Who's doing really well with that and who isn't, and how do we make that improvement? Because really, if you could take that composite and find 5 KPIs and shave 1 penny per mile off those 5 KPIs, and at the end of the year, I gave you back 5 cents a mile for your entire fleet, it's a game changer, right? It's a total game changer. So when you look at it like that, pick 3, pick 5, focus on them for the year, save yourself a penny a mile, and look at the win you have at the bottom line. And that's where our carriers find success.
Awesome. Well, we have one question we always like to ask our guests at the end too is what is your bold prediction for the future of trucking? I know we've talked about a lot of different historical trends. That was just a very interesting one there that you talked about the driver pay percentage revenue. So what are some other things you're seeing that will continue to play out into the future?
Yeah, it is. I wish I had a crystal ball because I would have made a lot of money probably in the last few years. I think I missed a few here. I think that we're definitely in a trend, and I really do expect to see 24 come back. I mean, we can't forget it's an election year. Everybody's trying to figure out what the new normal is, but this is an election year, and we can find some truths in an election year. So we're already watching fuel prices come down. We're seeing that, and that's an election year trend. We are going to see things that we have always seen for election. The economy is really important to people who want your votes. So we're going to see, I think, some positive movement in that just because of the election. I think the other thing that's really important to our industry that has to be figured out is capacity. There are far more trucking companies in operation right now than there was in 2020. I believe the number might be well over 100,000. And they're small, albeit they are small, but still it's a huge chunk of capacity. And when we speak to finance companies who have financed these trucks, there's an issue with payment. There's an issue on fuel accounts. There is a group within our industry that is absolutely struggling with this. And as that capacity starts to figure itself out, whether that is getting absorbed into larger companies or falling to the wayside, that is going to have a huge impact on what the second half of our year looks like. And I think we're all just kind of waiting for that capacity to settle because it's imminent. It's coming.
Yeah, and then where can carriers find you or those looking to join the group? What would the process look like for them?
Yeah, definitely. Come find us at TCA, truckload.org. You can come to any of our conventions and meet us. You can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with you however we can. And once we identify your mode and what might be a good set of carriers for you to benchmark against, then we would, set off with the carrier profile and get approval from legal and get you an invite to your first meeting. So it does take a little bit to get up and running because you do have to attend a meeting. We only meet 2 or 3 times a year. So the process can be a little bit lengthy to get you in. But we are excited to have new carriers, and there is room in every single group that we have. So we're definitely looking for some additions.
Awesome. Well, Amanda, I appreciate you sharing your experience and bringing it to these groups and facilitating, making all this possible. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I've heard nothing but great things, and it sounds like such a great experience. So I'm happy all these carriers have kind of found their home in these groups and made this circle where they can have these advisory councils that you discussed. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. It's great to hear that people are advocating for us and so happy with the program that we are putting out and that we are facilitating for them. And I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk about it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amanda. And I think we'll see you at the TCA convention in March. So looking
Yes,
forward to
yes.
it.
That sounds great, Jacob. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.